All right, next part on how I was a key witness in a military and enlivening trial, how it absolutely completely destroyed me, and how I'm still recovering to this day. But first, check out the tattoo if you guys didn't see it. I did it. I got a tattoo, y'all. I did it. The artist was super phenomenal. I cannot brag on him enough because he made me feel completely comfortable, and that's what's important. So if you guys are in the Savannah area, please go check him out. His name is Jimmy Butcher, and he is phenomenal, and you should go travel to see him because this guy has worked with people that like you cannot imagine, and he is phenomenal, you guys. So I linked him in my last video, but if you guys can go back and follow him, because I encouraged him to start doing TikToks. I was like, just start doing freaking TikToks. People would love to watch you like tattoo and create and all of those things. I'm like, just don't think about it, just do it. So Jimmy, if you watch this, please start doing TikToks. But military and enlivening trial, Jesus. Okay, so here we go. You guys know that we left off where they had basically said that I was going to have to testify. Well, if you guys don't know my last story about being locked on a property for several years, then this part won't make any sense. But if you did watch that, and if you watch my playlist of my escape, you will know that I ended up locked on a property not long after this all happened. Okay, so I ended up locked on a property. Nobody could find me, and I was not in contact with literally anybody, okay? So I just fell off the grid because I was busy being locked in a house. And then once I had my boys and I was sent to work, which was about a year later, I was sent back to work. I'm at work one day, and I was working at Kohl's doing HR for them. And I'm like at work, and I get a phone call from my ex. And he said, the police are looking for you. And I was like, oh my gosh, do they know? They didn't know. And he said, you better get your ass home. And I was like, what did I do? And he's like, they found you. And I was like, who found me? And they were like, it's about, your relative that unalived a baby. And I was like, oh my God. And I was like, I didn't do anything. And they're like, well, they're looking for you. And we gave them your information. And like, basically they're going to call you, get your ass home. And I was like, oh my gosh. So he comes and picks me up because of course he doesn't let me drive. So he comes and picks me up, he takes me home, and I get a phone call from a detective. And it is the guy who's like prosecuting this whole thing through the Marine Corps. This wasn't going through like normal court. This was going court through the military, okay? So he calls and he's like, you're a really difficult person to find. I'm like, yeah, well, but I didn't say anything. I was like, I'm sorry. And he was like, we're going to trial in 3 weeks and we need you here to testify. And I was like, oh, whoa, okay. Like, what does that look like? I was in Las Vegas and trial was going to be in San Diego. And I was like, I don't know how that's going to happen. And he's like, well, you're going to have to fly out here and stay for a couple of days and we will, call you in to testify. I told my ex that. He lost his mind because there's no way he could let me out of his sight for a couple of days. And he couldn't let me be around people that I might end up trusting and telling something to for a couple of days. And I was terrified because I knew he would keep my kids and I didn't want anything bad to happen to my kids. So I was spiraling. He was spiraling because he couldn't let me out of his sight. It was a disaster. So he ends up getting an attorney. My ex ends up getting an attorney, and this attorney calls the investigator, and they're going back and forth about how they can't have me. Well, you know what? Like, the military can have you if they want you. So they end up arguing that they will basically put me on a plane. I'm going to be picked up at the airport, and then I'm going to be taken to testify, and I'm going to put right back on a plane and come back. It was supposed to be like a really quick turnaround. So the flight from Las Vegas to San Diego is not very long. So it was like, we're going to put her on a plane. She's going to fly out. She's going to walk in and testify. We're going to put her back on a plane. She'll be back to you. I had return flights. Like, I'm leaving at 5 a.m. and I'm coming back at like 3 p.m. Like, it was supposed to be really quick. And so I was like, okay. And so my ex like drilled it into my head that like he had my kids and I better watch what I did. So I was scared. I was terrified to leave at that point. I didn't feel safe leaving my kids behind. And I was like, this is not a good situation, let alone I was going to have to go testify. And when I asked the prosecutor, I was like, is my loved one going to be there? Like, am I going to have to look at him? They're like, yeah, he'll be in the room. And I was like, I don't know if I can do, I don't know if I can look at him and say the things that he did to me. Like, I just don't know if I can do that. And they said, well, that's easy because you can't actually testify about the abuse that he put you through. And I was like, then why am I going? Like, it didn't make if I can't testify about the abuse, then why am I there? And they're like, it was ruled in pretrial that like, you cannot testify about any of the abuse. but you can testify that, like, if he told you about the baby, when he told you about the baby, and, like, any conversations you had about the baby. And I was like, we didn't talk about the baby. Like, they're like, well, that's why we're bringing you. And I was like, what? So I'm trying to get information from them. The prosecutor was being a complete dick, probably mostly because of the fight my ex was putting up to not let me go. Like, he started hating me from the get-go. And I was like, I'm your witness. Like, why are you being so mean to me? Like, he wouldn't answer my questions. He wouldn't do anything. It was like, you're going to get your ass out here. You're going to testify. You're going to go home. They were so inconvenienced by me, which I was like, why am I even going? But I went for her. I went for the baby because she deserved justice. And I was like, if me saying something gives this baby justice, then it does. And so they put me on a plane. My ex put me on a plane at like 5 a.m. out of Las Vegas. And I was so scared. I was so terrified to get on that plane. I didn't know how to fly. I didn't know how to do anything. I was so scared of people. He literally told me, do not talk to anyone. He dropped me off at the airport. I went in with my ticket. I literally sat there completely quietly waiting, didn't do anything, got on the plane, sat there completely quietly, didn't talk to anybody, and then I got off the plane. And there were supposed to be people there waiting at the airport to get me. So I get out of the airport in San Diego. I get out of like the area, and I walk up front to like baggage claim, and there are 2 Marines there. And I was like, I'm assuming that's them. So I walked up to them and they said, are you Miss Blank? And they gave my last name, and I was like, yes. And they're like, all right, let's go. And so these guys put me in the back of their car, and they had gotten charged with driving me that day. So they drive me to Camp Pendleton, California. And so we get to Camp Pendleton, and I have lots of memories from Camp Pendleton. That's where part of my childhood was. I have like good memories, bad memories. So being back in all of that was bringing up all these feelings, and then also knowing that I'm about to go testify against the man who raised me part of the time, who I love incredibly much, and who unalived his daughter. That was a hell I hope nobody ever goes through. And so we get into Camp Pendleton. They like bring me in, and they bring me into like a brick building. Sorry, guys. They bring me into like a brick building, okay? And we walk into this building, and it's like dark. It's like dark and not very well lit. It wasn't like an actual courthouse. Like, it did have a courtroom, but it didn't feel like a courthouse, like a civilian courthouse. So they bring me in, and I haven't eaten breakfast, mind you, because I left at 5 a.m. And now it's like 8:30, and I was like, oh, I'm starting to get a little bit hungry. So I was like, can I have water? They were like, no. They literally went and sat me in a room. God, this is so fucking triggering. They went and sat me in a room, okay? And I sat in that room, and they closed the door behind them, and in walks a detective. And it is the detective that came and interviewed me the day that, they broke all the news to me. And he comes in, he's like, hey, I remember you. And I was like, hey. And he was like, I'm testifying first, so you're just going to wait here, and then I'll go in and I'll testify, and then you're going to go after me. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I thought I was just going in, testifying, and coming right back out. Well, they call this guy maybe 45 minutes later, and we're just sitting there in complete silence. There's nothing in this room. It's literally just a room with like 4 chairs. There's nothing, okay? I have my phone, but I'm not allowed to talk to anybody, and I don't have an extra charger, and I don't know what I'm gonna do. And so I'm like just sitting here like quietly looking at my phone like I hope it lasts all day. And he didn't send me with a charger or anything, and I'm just sitting there with like nothing. I didn't have any money. I didn't have anything. I had literally nothing besides my phone that might die and nothing else, okay? So I'm just sitting there quietly. I have my ID, obviously, because I was flying, but I didn't have any money. And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to sit here. And they call the guy out to testify. He closes the door behind him, and I sit there for another 45 or so minutes. And then I go, and I was like, I really have to go find like water or something. Like, I'm feeling really nauseous and thirsty. Like, they promised my ex that they were going to feed me, and nobody had fed me. And I was like starting to get a little bit nauseous. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to open the door to try to go get some water. Guys, I go to open this door, and it is locked from the outside. I go to open this door, and it is locked from the outside. And I start pulling on the door. I'm pulling on the door, and I realize that I am locked in here in a building that is dark. And I don't know who's around me, and I don't know who can hear me. And I'm locked in there. And I start to lose my shit. I start to panic. Like a feral panic that I cannot explain, because I am now locked in this room, and I don't know if anybody's ever going to come get me.